Hey everyone, Dylan here from AYCB Board, and today I've got a special video for you as I take you through my top 5 POLYOMINO games of all time. Now, for those unfamiliar, POLYOMINO games are those that have the Tetris-like shapes that are usually fitting together in a grid or on a player board of some kind. And it's honestly pretty ironic that I enjoy POLYOMINO games as much as I do, because I was absolutely terrible at Tetris growing up. In fact, I'm still terrible at Tetris now. In fact, maybe I'm terrible at POLYOMINO games as well, and I just masochistically enjoy the feeling of utter failure. But seriously, for whatever reason, I've grown very fond and attached to POLYOMINO games over the last few years, whether they be of the more laid-back, relaxing variety or part of a heavier, more involved experience. So I'm going to break down my top 5 for you, and I'll go over a little bit about why I picked each one. Let's jump right into it. Should we put a deep, like, booming number 5 in here? Is that the acceptable format? Oh, we don't have the budget. Oh, we have 0 budget. Oh, okay, I'll do it myself.
Number 5.
All right, so my number 5 is a very new game, but one that I've quickly fallen in love with, and that is New York Zoo. Now, New York Zoo is great for a lot of reasons, but primarily because it's such a refinement on everything that's come before it from Uwe Rosenberg. It is his newest POLYOMINO game, and it really shows. It feels like it's distilled the best parts of the other games that came before it that he's done in the POLYOMINO genre and put them into this one. In POLYOMINO games, I don't know if this is the case for everyone out there, but for me, there's sort of this unspoken rule when I'm playing that is, regardless of what the rules are and what the win condition is, you're trying to see if you can fully complete your grid. And New York Zoo takes that concept and makes it the only win condition. The only way you win in New York Zoo is being the first player to fully complete your grid, and there's something really satisfying about that, because no matter what, when you win, you have this fully completed grid, and it just gives you this sense of satisfaction and completion that you don't always get from other POLYOMINO games if you have a bunch of holes left over all over the board. Likewise, the animals act as a really refreshing mechanic and twist on the normal POLYOMINO elements, but without making the experience too complicated. Although the rulebook would have you believe differently. I mean, honestly, I don't like this rulebook. But in reality, it's a pretty straightforward experience. There's this constant balance that you're trying to strike between gathering animals and gathering tiles to place on your board. And obviously, you want the tiles to finish your board, but at the same time, there's going to be gaps and little spaces that you can only fill by gaining the attractions. And the only way to gain those is by completing entire enclosures of animals. So you have to strike this balance of how much do you go for animals, and how much do you prioritize that, and how much do you just simply grab tiles in the biggest tiles that you can whenever you can to be able to fully fill your grid. Striking that balance and finding that balance is something that has just been so satisfying in every game I've played of New York Zoo. Also, I can't quite describe it, but New York Zoo somehow ends up feeling like potentially the most relaxing POLYOMINO game on the list. The theme and artwork are easy on the eyes, the turns are simple, the animal pieces are fun to play with, and despite the racing aspect, it still feels smooth, subdued, and enjoyable throughout. I'm already a huge fan, and I could see it climbing in the years ahead and replacing other games on the list, but for now, it is my number 5.
Number 4.
My number 4 is also a new game, and that is Isle of Cats. Isle of Cats. I love cats. I love cats. Holy shit. Now, Isle of Cats kind of snuck up on me. It flew under my radar. I knew about it well before I actually played it, but once I did play it, it was one of those things where I had to question how I didn't get this to the table earlier, especially being a fan of POLYOMINO games. And that's because it has solid POLYOMINO mechanics, but it also adds in new mechanics as well, and things I hadn't seen with the POLYOMINO experience before. So for instance, it adds in a hand of cards and card drafting, and these cards are used to determine things such as, which categories you're going to score for at the end of the game, as well as in what order you're going to draft the actual POLYOMINO tiles and how many of those tiles you can draft, which is very cool. And again, I hadn't really seen in a POLYOMINO game before. Now, this is a quick overview and really an oversimplification, but there is a lot of really cool stuff going on in this game, and I just had to appreciate things that they did to go the extra mile as well. So in contrast to New York Zoo, I thought the rulebook in this game was excellent. They sprinkle a lot of story content in there throughout. They make it really easy to read and understand, but also the theme is just very rich and more so than I expected, or I think a lot of people would expect. It's just very, very solid all around in terms of its presentation. But overall, if you love POLYOMINO games but are looking for something new and something fresh, Isle of Cats is going to be a really solid choice, and overall, it's just a really solid game. So that is my number 4, Isle of Cats. I love cats. Isle of Cats. I love cats. Crazy.
Number 3.
This is working, the whole deep voice spinning number thing. I mean, like, who needs a budget? We could really use a budget. All right, so my number 3 is, what I would consider a classic, and I think it's been out long enough to call it a classic, and it really is the game that ignited POLYOMINO Games for me, and I think for a lot of people, and that one is Patchwork. Now, I will preface this by saying that in a lot of ways, Patchwork has been overshadowed and replaced, even for me, in terms of, Uwe Rosenberg even himself has come up with so many other POLYOMINO games since Patchwork that take those concepts and do them, but just in a better way or a more refined way. However, Patchwork is the game that got me into this genre, and there's a reason for that, and that's because it's a very solid and tight polyomino experience, and it's also such a great and familiar game to go back to. Myself and my fiance come back to this constantly, especially when we're indecisive or can't decide between other games. It's just always a go-to. And on top of that, it has easily the most exciting theme in any board game ever created, quilts. Okay, so it's not the most exciting theme, but it fits super well and it lends to the inherent relaxing nature of Patchwork. And really, the only downside I'd ever really have with Patchwork is that it's only a 2-player experience, but ever since all these other polyomino games have come out that have given us options at 3, 4, 5 players, that really hasn't been as much of an issue. And like I said, it's just a game I constantly want to come back to. It's the original, there's nostalgia there as well. It's a great game, one that I think everyone who's looking for a title to play with their partners or their friends, and just in a 2-player setting, I think should have in their collection. That is Patchwork, my number 3.
Number 2.
We're going back to another new game, and this one might arguably be the most unique one on the list, and that is My City. So My City is my number 2, and it is a legacy polyomino game. And I can honestly say that before My City came along, I never quite thought about mashing up those two genres together. Now, My City may actually be the most simplistic polyomino game on the list when it comes to base mechanics, as essentially you're simply flipping a card, which tells you which tile to place, and then you're placing that tile. However, it's the legacy elements that offer an ever-changing landscape of unexpected twists and a myriad of possibilities. Now, what I find most interesting about My City is that each of the chapters in the legacy game could almost have been like a standalone experience or a different version of My City. You could almost look at it as each chapter is sort of an expansion on My City's base mechanics. It's almost as if the game comes with 8 expansions in the box that can only be played one at a time, but each of those evolves the base rules that you've already learned with My City and functions as a standalone experience while also changing everything that came before it. Plus, when you're done with the legacy portion of the game, you're left with an infinitely playable base game from Reiner Knizia that is solid in its own right. Honestly, each time I play My City, I leave the session just constantly thinking about it and wanting to play it again, and I find that to be such an achievement for a game with such simplistic rules, but they're just refined so great, and the extra additions that come along with it are just perfect additions to the game and change it up in just the right ways that I can't recommend My City enough. And you get such legs out of it too. If you're looking for a game to play when you're in quarantine or lockdown, depending where you are, with a partner or a roommate or something like that, this game will last you a while just in the legacy portion alone. But then again, it's infinitely playable after that point. So a great choice, My City, number 2.
Number 1.
Now, my number 1 will not be a surprise to anyone who knows me. It is by far the most complex and involved experience on the list, and it's one where the polyomino mechanic arguably isn't the main mechanic in the game, but I think it's the polyomino aspect that helps make this game as special as it is. I am talking, of course, about Uwe Rosenberg's A Feast for Odin. Now, I could talk at lengths about how much I love this game, so I'll try to keep this short. A Feast for Odin is a beast of a game with so many action spaces that it will likely make the casual gamer in your group want to vomit at first glance. However, after you wrap your head around all the options at your disposal, the game has a pretty succinct flow to it, and the polyomino aspect definitely gives it a more inviting feel. There is something inherently welcoming about polyominoes, I feel, and it's definitely working in Feast for Odin's favor. I think my favorite aspect about Feast for Odin and what ultimately makes it one of my favorite games of all time is just how many possibilities you have and how you can play it a little differently every time you get it to the table. Even with all the cards that come out, your strategy can be shaped by what cards you draw or what cards you start the game with, but you also have to be malleable because depending on what your opponents are going after and which action spaces they're going to, you might have to try to find other avenues to victory. It's just a game that every time I play it feels a little different, and so it just feels like it has such insanely high replay value. A Feast for Odin is a game I will always come back to and always love the experience, so it is an easy choice for my number 1. And perfect for the polyomino addict in your life. If one polyomino board isn't enough for you, how about 2 or 3 or 4 or 5? There's so many polyomino boards that you can gain and acquire. The choice is up to you. It's just how much you think you can handle. And there you have it, my top 5 Polyomino games of all time as of 2020. What did you think of the list? What are your top 5 Polyomino games of all time? Let us know in the comments. Let us know if there's any you think we shouldn't have put on the list or any that we missed. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.